Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, you were up late last night working on this bipartisan government spending bill. How many of you guys voted against this thing?
There were about 40 of us who voted against it, maybe 35 who voted against it at the earlier stages. Here's the weird thing, though, Glenn. We voted on this a couple times last week. The bill didn't yet exist at the time. The bill didn't exist until last night, late last night. I finally received it as I was sitting on the Senate floor with a bunch of my colleagues who were getting ready to give speeches in favor of it. And all of a sudden, I got it electronically. It's 2,702 pages long.
Yeah, well, that's an easy read.
Kind of strange that they voted to proceed to it without knowing what it was first. But
well, let me ask you this. Isn't this kind of just like, weren't really last week just saying, hey, how much do you want to spend? We'll fill it in later. How much do you want to spend? Isn't that what it was?
Yeah, that's kind of what they were doing. Deciding overall threshold amounts and deciding, in general terms, what the agreement would consist of. But normally that's not how we vote on actual pieces of legislation. But in any event, we've got it now. It's 2,702 pages long.
How much is spent? How much is spending on this one?
It spends $1.2 trillion.
Oh, love that.
And of that $1.2 trillion, 550 of it is new federal spending. That's above and beyond what we were expected to spend this year, which strikes me as curious, given that it's a terrible time to be spending more money at a time when, due to deliberate, reckless overspending by the federal government, poor and middle-class Americans are finding that everything they purchase is more expensive. From chicken breast to gasoline to cars to housing, everything is more expensive because we're spending too much money in Washington.
Oh, my gosh. Stu, how can we listen to this old-timey guy? Blah, 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 inflation. Don't you know that inflation is not a problem? It's not going to be a problem because they're digitizing. They're not actually printing. They're digitizing, Mike, and that is totally different. It's transitory.
Yeah, and that, of course, makes those dollars spent very differently and inflation-proof, doesn't it?
It sure does. You brought up, when you were on the floor of the Senate, I watched some of the highlights, and you made a great point about inflation. You were like, even just the act of spending all of this money, when you're talking about infrastructure, will drive the cost of the things that are already expensive up because now the private sector has to compete with the government.
That's exactly right. So everything that goes into these projects, from cement to the aggregate materials you use to make concrete, to steel, to labor, and everything else, all those things are more expensive right now. And so, look, I'm not a fan of stimulus-style spending, but even to those who might be, they might be able to make a slightly less bad case for this in a time when demand for these products is low and industries are shutting down. I still wouldn't like to see government doing that, but whatever. You can make a case for it in that circumstance, not one that I agree with, but you can't make a good case for doing it right now, where everything is inflated, where every federal dollar we put into this is going to go less far because it's a federal dollar and it comes with lots of strings attached, and it will go even less far because of the fact that all of these things are in short supply and can be procured only at a premium. We will get less from this as a result of the fact that it's federal and as a result of the fact that we're doing it right now.
So why are they saying this is a good deal? Why are the Republicans even thinking we have to do any of this stuff?
Well, look, I'm always reluctant to speak for those who are not present. I'm not a good spokesman for them because I disagree fundamentally with what they're doing. I suspect if one of them were on the phone with us, they'd say, okay, well, first of all, we need infrastructure. Secondly, if we do this, then what the Democrats do on their bill, the bill that they intend to pass with a simple majority, either later this week or later this month, they will spend less than they would otherwise spend if we didn't do this. Now, if we were in court and someone testified to that effect, I'd stand up and say, objection, assumes facts not in evidence. I don't know how they can possibly know that they will spend less if we pass this bill. And in any event, that doesn't mean we don't have to put our names on something that we think is bad and harmful to the American people if we don't agree with it. Look, Glenn, there are sort of three different groups of people in America, one of which will benefit from this bill, one of which might not notice much of a difference, and the others will be hurt by it. The first group, consisting of those who might benefit from it, tend to be wealthy, well-connected individuals and business interests in this country who might actually get rich off of it. The next group consists of well-off Americans who have enough money that they won't notice a big hit to their cost of their lifestyle. But almost everyone else, the vast, overwhelming majority of Americans, fits into the third category of people who have limited paychecks. They're, in many cases, living paycheck to paycheck. Every dollar will buy less as a result of spending like this one. Those people will be hurt. So in some ways, we're exchanging one thing for another. In some ways, we're taking money away from poor and middle-class Americans and giving it to the wealthy and well-connected. I can't justify that.
This is the opposite of Robin Hood. This is the opposite of Robin Hood.
The opposite of Robin Hood. Exactly.
Senator Lee, there's some argument that passing something bipartisan gives Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema some talking point to go back to Democrats and say we shouldn't drop the filibuster. Do you think there's anything to that at all?
Yeah, look, I don't want them to drop the filibuster. They shouldn't drop the filibuster. We have no guarantee that if we didn't do this, they would drop the filibuster, or that by doing this, they won't. No guarantee whatsoever. What we have to vote on is the legislation before us. Now, the legislation before us, 2,702 pages long, which we received late last night, has been hammered out over a period of 4 months by 10 very smart, very hard-working senators with whom I happen to disagree on this issue, but they worked hard on it. They've had 4 months to come up with 2,702 pages. It is beyond folly to suggest that the entire Senate should now get up to speed on that and be expected to process it, amend it, vote on it, and pass it within a period of a few days. We need, arguably, at least as much time as they did. At a minimum, we need at least a few weeks to work on this. We have no business spending this amount of money and passing this size of a bill that we saw for the first time last night within a few days.
Remember, it was Barack Obama who said he was going to have the transparency that had never happened before, and he would post every bill for at least a couple of weeks before it was ever voted on. They never did that. Nobody ever has an intention of doing this, and all of these things are banged out, and really a lot in the House is just put together by the heads of the party, and then everybody else is just told vote for it.
Yes, no, that's exactly right, and it reflects one of the sad biases that you see in this place. You know, senators get praise when they pass big spending bills. They get criticized when they vote against them. They assume that passing legislation is a good thing in the abstract. I'm reminded of something that Calvin Coolidge once said. He said, as a lawmaker, it's important to both pass good bills and stop bad ones. They're both important, but as between the two, it's the second that's more important. It's more important to stop the bad bills because a good bill that doesn't pass today can always be passed later. A bad bill, once it passes, it's nearly impossible to unwind. You can't ever get rid of it. And that's why we've got to focus on this. Look, a handful of senators will get praised if this thing passes. But that praise and that adulation, that political notoriety for a few days, will have long-term consequences for America's poor and middle class. And that concerns me greatly.
Can you tell us what infrastructure even means now, Mike?
Well, look, it means a lot of things. In this bill, they're talking about all sorts of things, from highways to bridges to roads.
Okay, hang on just a second. We have every time there's a big bill, it's an infrastructure bill. When and how much was it going to take to actually fix the roads and the bridges, the federal roads and bridges? Because I'm tired of hearing about infrastructure, fixing the roads and bridges, because nobody ever shows us any progress on that and says, okay, we're a lot closer. Just an endless infrastructure bill. Fix the roads and bridges.
Right. And look, you can always identify things that have been fixed. And that's why things like this can be very tempting, because people can point to good things that will happen to good people and good communities that are well deserving of improvements. The question I raise is, does it have to be this much? Does it have to be right now? And does it have to be through this government? I'm still going through this bill because it takes a while to do it. It doesn't read like a fast-paced novel. But Glenn, I will be shocked if there isn't a whole lot of infrastructure in here that isn't federal in nature, that is not or should not be federal. Now, if it's part of an interstate highway, then yeah, perhaps it should be federal, or some other project that with an appropriate federal nexus that's close, maybe so. I'm willing to bet that a large portion of this is going to go to surface streets that start and stop in the same state, and things that are otherwise not necessarily appropriate for the federal government. And that's not just an esoteric problem. It creates real financial problems.
Correct.
The minute you add $1 of federal spending to an infrastructure project, in many states like mine, it can add 30%, sometimes more, to the cost of the project, because you have to comply with this Byzantine labyrinth of federal regulations and mandates. And so you're buying less with more money when you make it federal. We shouldn't do that.
There's also a $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill coming our way.
Yes. That is a bill that the Senate Democrats are working on, that they believe that they can pass with a mere 51 votes. And I'm calling it the inflation bomb, because that would truly be it. They've learned over time that bills can be more palatable if you call them something most Americans understand and resonate with.
Patriot Act.
If you call it about the troops or about national security generally, or if you talk about infrastructure, perhaps they'll accept it more easily. But this inflation bomb that they want to pass with a simple majority is a whole lot of stuff that has nothing to do with infrastructure. It's just big government spending. And to put that in perspective, $3.5 trillion, many of us expect it'll be more like $4 or $5 trillion, by the way. That's roughly on par with what we spend in a particular year out of the entire federal government in a non-COVID year. So if they expect that we can roughly double that amount and have no consequences, they're crazy. They're just not looking at the facts. Look, 37% of all U.S. dollars that have ever come into existence have been printed in the last 18 months. You don't do that without making a whole lot of poor middle-class Americans poorer.
Hey, one last thing I'd like to ask you, because I know that they're working on airports here, but the Green New Deal would like to get rid of all airplanes, by 2030. Why would we be building new airports if we have to dramatically cut our air travel? I'd just like you to ask somebody there and see if you can find an answer. Mike Lee, thank you so much for being on with us, and thank you for standing and fighting the good fight. I certainly appreciate it. It's Senator Mike Lee from Utah on the latest infrastructure bill that they put together in the Senate.